Hey there, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I'll be taking a look at Cram Comics, issue number 1, Relic Crafting for Future Travelers. This looks like it was printed in New York, so I'm assuming this is people who are on New York, but I'm not sure. But it looks like these are people who are at the Rizzo Lab, New York. And they're like, because of how the colors are handled very differently with each artist, it seems like this is a group of people in New York that are all working together. And a lot of the stories revolve around New York, and it feels very New York to me. It's kind of interesting because in the last couple of weeks, I've got all the stuff from Dead Crow, which is like an Oakland underground crew. And then right after I record this, I'm going to record some Reptile House comics. They were kind enough. I had reviewed one of their anthologies, and they sent me some more, and that's a group out of Philadelphia. And I'm noticing with these that there is a flavor of each city, and it kind of meets my expectations for the flavor. Like with the Dead Crow crew, once I understood they were started in Oakland and started at a fine art school in the Bay Area, their work just made a lot more sense to me. And this one, I'll point out as I go, a lot of what feels very New York to me. Like here, it's a story about taking an Uber to Queens, and like the Uber everywhere, public transportation, that seems very New York to me. Just this conversation with the cab driver. You're not going to get that in the same way in the Bay Area, because you're more likely to jump on BART, or I don't know. It's just, I've lived in the Bay Area for a long time. I guess not recently. Maybe this is more likely now, but I don't know. This just feels like my experience when I'm in New York and my assumptions about New York. So this first one here is by Stepan Tadic, Uber to Queens, and I really like that just hot yellow that you can get from the Rhizograph. The second story here is by Andrew Alexander. Again, this one feels very New York to me. Even the way the characters are drawn just feels like all of the kids I knew from grad school that went to New York and are trying to make it as artists and are living poor, and it just feels like the New York hipster thing to me. They're going to like a county fair and enjoying that. It's a good, really well illustrated story. Really like how Andrew's using the Rhizograph colors. But one thing that stood out to me is there is a New York thing here, and especially like art school kids who go to New York, where of course we're educated in art history, and when we're talking to each other we name drop and reference a lot, and there's a lot of that in this book. Like right here, they're kind of out enjoying this like rural setting and enjoying the the more like authenticity of it or something like that. They don't actually say it, but it has that vibe of like, look, we've gotten out of the city and we're enjoying like some real life. And then they're seeing all these kind of like craft fair artists that you get at these things too, and asking, do you think any of these artists are like working on their woodshed masterpiece? And she says, like a Henry Darger type of way, maybe. And Henry Darger, if you don't know, is like one of the most famous outsider artists. And I think myself included, a lot of kids who go to art school are a bit bummed that we've now become part of the system, and we enjoy that like guy shacked up in his house just doing what he wants, not bound by one of the things you always get in art school is like, well, who are you indebted to? What's your like vein that you're in, and you're kind of responsible for knowing that, and always kind of being responsive to that for some reason. And you oftentimes just want to buck that off and be like, fuck that, I'm just going to do what I want. And so that's why we do celebrate those kind of artists, because we're all a bit jealous of the purity of it, I think. But that just felt like art school kid stuff. Another thing I noticed is that with this, at least this group of artists, there's a higher level of polish in what they're doing, which I don't know, that may just be this group of artists. The Oakland and the Philly artists seem like more willing to lean into chaos, and these artists to me seem a little bit cleaner. This story here by Cade McClements. So when I was reading this, I'd already kind of picked up on like, this is like a bunch of kids who came out of art school. This feels New York to me. And then this next story is The Freelancer by Cade McClements, and this is about someone who's basically an art transporter. And that was something that a number of my friends from Cranbrook who moved to New York and were living in like a closet trying to make it in their art career, they were doing art transportation, driving around a super expensive piece of art for a dealer in a van, and get very good at being art handlers, basically. So this is like a little horror story constructed around that idea. And again, it felt like, well, this is obviously done by someone who went to art school and is now living that life in New York. This here is a piece by Max Huffman, who I pretty recently recorded a review of a whole bunch of his stuff, because I saw one of his books and fell in love with it. And I really, really do. I mean, the way that he's taking advantage of these risograph colors is just really, really beautiful. I think this is probably my favorite piece in the book, just because of the style and the story, and it feels less grounded in reality. It's more sci-fi, so it has less of those vibes. But again, it still has this like art school modernist kind of vibe. It feels someone who's both taking cartooning influences and the history of art into account. Like these kind of things here just feel very postmodern. This is like a head on a building, but it's also an airport. Like early modernist, and then some weird like postmodern on top of that. So I don't know. I really like Max Huffman stuff. And then you see here that form repeat, and it's no longer an airport, but it's like some kind of helmet on his head. So really, really enjoy Max Huffman. Really, really enjoy his work. This one here by Claire Gunther, Celia, and Rebecca. This is just a short little autobio story of giving piano lessons, which again just feels like a pretty art school kid scrounging up money type of thing to me. Being a nanny, giving lessons. I remember people in art school giving art lessons and going through exactly what was going on here. Is they're teaching one kid and they figure out if they can like teach all three at the same time, then they can make like 3 times as much money. I definitely had friends do exactly that. So that's why I'm saying this all just feels familiar to me. Then this last piece here is really interesting to me, but I had a hard time reading it because I just like I don't play enough video games, but this does call back to me as a kid without a game system, getting like dropped off in the magazine section at Target and just looking at the video game magazines. And I really remember this format, and the artist Caleb Hummus has done such a good job of recreating that look. It's not as glossy and high resolution as it should be, but that's just because of the risograph. So within the constraints of the process, and especially with, I think this is only a 5-color book supposedly, really, really getting a huge range of color out of it. So a really technically impressive thing. And then, like I said, I just remember looking at these magazines, and I'm sure most of the audience has an even stronger connection to these things than I do. It's really cool. And I also think it's putting those kind of screen caps that tell the story of the video game in the context of comics for me. I never thought about that. So there's a formalism here that's really compelling to me, that's making me think about magazine layout as equivalent to comics, and especially the screenshot showing the video game. Because like for me, as someone who didn't have a game system but would hear people talk about it, I would go to the store when I could and drop off in the magazine section and kind of follow what the video game everyone else was playing. And I never thought about it as a comic, but this, putting it in a comic anthology, makes that very clear to me. Like, oh shit, yeah, that was what was going on. So I think that's really clever and cool. And then just technically super impressive. And then there's a really extra funny bit here at the end where the goblin, this is the review written by Ubobo the Goblin. This is Caleb. And so this is the goblin playing Caleb's life. And at the end, it's like, he's pretty much saying that, I found it awful and a bit disturbing. I'll never be able to get that time back. I'm a goblin. My lifespan is shorter than you human folk. So it's like, what the fuck kind of boring game was this, playing a human life? And I really, really like that. I think it's funny. Again, I had a hard time reading it all just because, I don't know, that format was strange for me. But I picked up on the gist of it, I think. And I really enjoyed it still, even though I didn't read it. I know that's kind of funny, but it gave me a lot to chew on. So really, really enjoyed this book. Really am enjoying seeing the kind of differences in these different scenes, but I really like that there's the kind of this nationwide underground, that there's all these young artists fresh out of art school kind of really capturing the vibes of their city. I think is great, and I think the comics community should lean into that and support these artists. So if you can, go get yourself a copy of Cram Comics issue number 1. If you enjoy what we're doing here on the channel and you want to support us, there's 2 ways to do that. The first one is through our Patreon. We have 2 different tiers of engagement there. The second one comes with exclusive content, voting rights, and things like that. The money we get from that just helps us buy the books we review, so we'll put that back into other artists' pockets, and that helps us show off their work as well. So we appreciate that. And if you want to support Living the Line, the best thing to do is to support what Sean's doing with Living the Line Publishing. So we'll take a look at one of his products now. House on Fire by Matt Battaglia is a just gorgeous book where Matt's kind of making an emotional response to the years of COVID and wrapping that into a sci-fi dystopian future that really the sci-fi dystopian's backgrounded, and you're focused on the emotional journey of 2 characters in a really beautiful way. And then that's enhanced by Matt's like really awesome, loose, kind of Paul Popish dry brush work. And then Sean and Matt have worked to get this second kind of orange spot color in there that's going to look really, really beautiful, and has allowed Matt to use his dry brush technique to add tone to the thing too. So with Sean's production technique, this is going to be a gorgeous book with a lot of heart. Thanks for following along. Take it away, Jack.
You want to see all these books? Smash that subscribe button and the like button and the bell, and then you get them.